It's post consent for a price. You'll say an awkward line and fumble it,
Her male best friend wore Volcom from head to toe, and he was clearly in love with her.
or you'll wait too long for the perfect line and fumble it,
But you're fucked anyway.
or you'll just duck your eyes and wish this person were holding your head underwater and drowning this nobody fuck up, wasting her time.
It's cute. I'm thinking about the first person I ever met off a dating app. She wore these temporary tattoos on her chest. She had told me she would get a new one every single morning, and that by like 8 p.m., they'd already be fading off. So it's like trying a new tattoo out for the day. We were underage, but my brother had bought us a quart of Pinot Grigio. So we drank white wine and we talked about nothing. And she said she wanted to be a journalist, and I said nothing. When we woke up the next morning, she was already playing iMessage games with the guy that she would see that night. Like, and whatever, dude. Like, I still felt great from the night before. It was nice and romantic. But the trouble came when replacing that feeling was this anxiety that it might never happen to me again. Like, it was a fluke. Like, I didn't really understand people. Like, even if I went on the apps and I found someone to meet up with that night, it wouldn't matter because there's so many people on those apps that given enough time, everyone had a 100% chance of finding someone. So if couldn't have everyone that I saw, it was like I could have no one at all. And to make matters worse, it turned out that the girl that I had just seen, I caught a rare strain of viral pink eye when she was swimming in Lake Travis, and it was so gross. It was so gross. Like when I would Snapchat people for the rest of the month, I'd be wearing 2 pairs of sunglasses. Oh, it's so gross. I want to spend this video talking about why dating apps make you feel like a weird little gremlin, even in the best of times. How it's inexplicable and inescapable, and it comes out of the two things that are greatest about dating apps. One, safety. The safety to learn about dating without hurting anyone, the safety to date without being hurt. And two, the entry into a shared cultural dialogue. All your friends are on these apps and they have cool stories. If you join these apps, you're going to meet some weird guys who will take you some weird and fun and cool places. But before we get into that, we need to talk a little bit about history, about business, about Gary and why he bought sex.com.
In the early 90s, a fledgling dating industry existed, but to us, it sounds excruciating. You could pay to put a personal ad in the paper, you could pay for professional matchmaking, or you could pay for 900 phone number dating services, but they all probably sucked, and it's probably why the number of adult couples who met online was just about statistically irrelevant at that time.
So enter the greatest character in all of online dating, Gary Creeman. He liked phone dating, but felt that they were too pricey, too inefficient. So what he wanted to do was take the old, outdated personal ad industry and put it online to create a worldwide database of singles. So he found Electric Classified Incorporated, and while he's at it, he buys the domain names for Match.com, and Jobs.com, and Sex.com.
Gary, well, didn't get women. He wasn't married, didn't even have a girlfriend. It was one of the reasons he wanted to make online dating better in the first place. Still, he knew a successful dating site would need to attract women, even if it was just an extreme minority. Early on, he said every woman would bring 100 geeky guys. This basic concept will be the cornerstone of every dating app we'll discuss today. It's what we call the bouncer principle. Girls get in for free. You can make all your money charging the men because, just like in a bar, the women are the actual product. The problem is, Gary had no idea how to get women on the website. He surveyed all the women in his life, which includes his friends, his family, and women off the street, just to see if they'd use his app. And unanimously, they said, no, absolutely not. What the fuck? Maybe it had something to do with the giant questionnaire he required of every user. It was absolutely fucking ridiculous. A lot of the questions are like, how much do you weigh? What's your favorite fetish?
So at this point, Gary makes a very wise decision and he hires a woman. You would think the guy who owns Sex.com would be a pretty bad boss for a woman, but Fran Mayer, who would become Electric Classified Incorporated's head of gender based marketing, actually found Gary electric. And while she was there, she'd do a lot of great stuff, like redo the questionnaire to make it shorter and generally less weird, while Gary would work on these much needed privacy features, like anonymous email addresses. At the same time, Gary, stud that he was, greenlit his marketing consultant's plan to do promotional outreach in queer communities, who he thought would be far hungrier for online dating than straight people.
Gary loved talking to the press, but could hardly not for the life of him be normal about it. In his first ever interview after securing funding, Gary promised that Match.com will bring more love to the planet than Jesus Christ.
If it even needs to be said, crazy overstatement. The app itself wasn't doing well. The site was used almost exclusively by men, and basically every woman you saw on the website was a fake account run by a Match employee.
Gary's staff had two hopes with this. One, get their 100 geeky guys for every woman, and two, make real women think that other real women were using the site. And these fake accounts didn't just sit there. Match employees actively catfished users, and by doing so realized what an uphill battle it was to make the internet a safe place for women.
After a Brazilian Nazi began harassing one of the fake accounts, they decided to introduce some basic safety guidelines and self policing tools like blocking and reporting accounts. And we kind of forget what a good tool blocking is on sites like this because there's almost no way to overcome the block or find the person outside of the site unless you're able to do a lot of sleuthing on the early internet.
Eventually, and I imagine to Gary's surprise, real women did start using the site. Match ended up having explosive growth. By 1996, there were 100,000 user registrations. Absolutely ridiculous number for an internet dating site in the 90s.
But as much as we like Gary, the board did not agree. Gary, see, had a vision to revolutionize dating itself, but investors just wanted to put newspaper ads online. So the board started to see Gary as unreliable, eccentric, a bad manager, just because he demands long hours of his employees and deliberately hired younger, more inexperienced people. It's because he could pay them less. It wasn't a sex thing. It's also rumored that the board didn't like his involvement with queer communities, which makes Gary an early example of someone getting canceled for being too woke.
We've been there, Gary. Eventually, he was removed for mismanagement, and the guy who was supposed to replace him died during a rafting accident a few days before he was supposed to start. Difficulty with finding a suitable replacement led to the board selling the company for $7 million in 1997, which ended up only giving Gary $50,000.
As if firing Gary wasn't enough evidence of this board being completely dumbassed, Match is sold to another company only 2 years later for $50 million. And they continue to run Electric Classifieds as a web version of newspaper ads until they go bankrupt in 2004. Because guess what? You don't need to view newspaper ads on the computer.
Gary, on the other hand, ended up falling in love with a beautiful woman who ended up leaving him for a guy she met on Match.com. Don't feel too bad for him though, because Gary ended up making $65 million after suing a guy for trying to steal Sex.com from him. By 2000, IAC was running Match.com and now had 157,000 concurrent subscribers. Competitors like eHarmony were popping up with questionnaires even longer than Gary's original prototype and algorithms that used information to match users.
And it's honestly crazy that Gary's site didn't have an algorithm because I can't imagine trying to sift through 150,000 personal ads that are located anywhere in the world. An algorithm is an obvious improvement to everyone, and eHarmony becomes the choice for people who are serious about dating, while Match is more casual and queer friendly. It's a similar dynamic to what we see nowadays between Hinge and Tinder, but also way, way different and way lower stakes. Because while Match and eHarmony were playing data softball, there was a revolution happening in Palo Alto, where a soft spoken behavioral scientist who opened every class by playing ukulele for his stuffed frog was teaching his students the secrets of mind control. In his book Stolen Focus, Johan Hari tells us how Professor BJ Fogg taught his students to incentivize their users the same way that behavioral scientists incentivize their rats to meaninglessly dance for food. This is feedback loops, it's infinite scrolling, etc., etc. The founder of Instagram was in attendance, as were many of the first engineers at Facebook. In Stolen Focus, they talk about Sean Parker, one of the earliest investors in Facebook. Here's Mr. Justin Timberlake himself talking about the early days of Facebook.
That thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you, more likes and comments. I mean, it's a social validation feedback loop that it's like it's exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. And I think that the inventors, creators, and it's me, it's Mark, it's the Kevin Systrom at Instagram, it's all of these people, understood this consciously, and we did it anyway.
Grindr is the first app to use geolocation in 2009. It is absolutely worth noting that Grindr tells you how far away other users are, not in miles, but in feet. Plus, anyone can send a message to your account, so it's not uncommon to be sitting at dinner with your family and get a notification on your phone that says, I could rim you in 15 different ways and you'll come in all of them from someone 15 feet away from you. And that is the reason that Grindr is the undefeated screenshot king of dating apps. But in any case, Gary's hunch was right. Gay people were way more enthusiastic about dating apps than straight people, because straight people can assume anyone they see in real life is straight, but queer people can't. So being able to know who in your neighborhood is queer is much more than a quality of life improvement. And that's why 65% of queer people were using dating apps to meet each other in 2009, and 65% of queer people were using dating apps to meet each other in 2017.
Straight people, on the other hand, had few incentives to ditch face-to-face encounters for app-mediated matchmaking. And with the Grindr model, unsolicited messages from strangers feet away, they absolutely would not have. Enter Sean Rad. He worked for Hatch, which was owned by AIC, the same guys who bought Match.com. In 2012, he wins a hackathon. He made an app called Matchbox that was similar to Grindr with one notable addition: the double opt-in. You scroll through a stack of photo-based profiles and swipe yes or no on each. If you both swipe yes, you can message each other. Both parties have to consent. Keep that in mind. It's a big privacy improvement. Good for bringing women over. One girl, 100 gig guys.
And it's a hit. 100,000 users sign up in less than a year. And within 5, the percentage of couples that met on dating apps doubles from 21 to 39%. And that's not just people who use the app, but couples. So why? Dating apps were for losers in the odds. That wasn't so long ago. Well, it's important to note that Tinder's competitors weren't Match or eHarmony, but they were Instagram, Facebook. The budding attention economy was based around incentivizing repetitive behaviors. The staple ones you'd see on social media sites are the ones we talked about earlier. That's, infinite scrolling, instant feedback, whatever. And Tinder used these, but they also got more elaborate. See, Tinder was using what we're going to call the mobile games model, right? You have daily login rewards. See today's top picks. You got loot boxes. Tap to reveal your secret admirer. You get temporary XP bonuses. Join the swipe surge. Buy a boost. You get timer resets. Get more swipes right now.
A few years back, EA Sports discovered the perfect way to hook players is to force them into a 50% win rate. They lose, they win, they lose, they win. Tinder shows you profiles that it knows you've already swiped no on, specifically to stimulate similar ups and downs. Pay to win. Using super likes tweaks your internal elo or desirability ranking by pushing your profile to the front of that person's stack. It doesn't work if they've already swiped no on you, but you can't know that. Most importantly, Tinder hooks whales. In freemium gaming, the goal is not to make everyone spend a little bit of money, but to hook whales, members of the elite minority of users who spend thousands of dollars on the game. In fact, freemium systems wouldn't work if everyone spent the same amount of money. The existence of free-to-play plebs over whom whales can gain a gameplay advantage or visually flex on is what motivates the big spenders.
With Tinder, it's interesting, right? Because boosting your account and using more super likes do put your profile in front of more people, but they don't do anything to motivate someone who would have swiped no on you to make a different decision. So with Tinder, it's not so much of an unfair advantage that whales have, but they have unfair access. You see, all paid versions of Tinder allow users to see who likes them without having to swipe to find out. And the uppermost paid tiers allow users to message other users before interacting with them.
Both of these features are in direct violation of the double consent principle behind the double opt-in swipe model Sean Rad invented. It might not seem like a big deal, but one person's already put themselves out there without expecting to be vulnerable.
And for some people, making someone vulnerable without their permission is a turn on. There's a reason that some OnlyFans stars sell their own content from anonymous accounts as leaks, and they say that these fake leaks often sell better than content from the original source. Some people like to and will pay to circumvent consent. Tinder allows them to.
Tinder introduced digitized consent, then created a paid avenue to do away with it. It's post-consent for a price. So Tinder has all these morally dubious ways to hook whales, but Tinder also needs a way to keep them. The best way is to keep them from finding love in perpetuity and thus induce the gambler's fallacy. Make them think they're just a couple of dollars off from striking it big. The original sale on the whale of Tinder Premium is helped along by the fact that Tinder just isn't a very good dating app, and they didn't have much of a chance of finding love anyway. But this new sale, the recurring investment, is helped by the fact that using Tinder Premium actually makes your odds worse.
There aren't a lot of statistics on this, but I'm going to turn over a quarter of my soul to y'all right now. That summer where I had big guy and I was, self-conscious about whether or not I could find romance. I actually paid for Tinder Premium, and well, I kept the spreadsheets. As we take a look through this, you'll see that it's fairly thorough. It has data on who it was that ended things, whether it was me, whether it was them, whether it was both of us, how many messages we exchanged where we moved off app, how many days we talked in general, what my opening line was, how things ended up going. And you'll see that it's fairly even which of us actually ends something. And you'll see it continues kind of in that pattern until this dividing line right here, which is where I actually paid for Tinder Gold. These ones highlighted in gold right here are times when I actually plucked from that feature where you can see who likes you first in order to send a message. And what I didn't realize when I did that was that this puts a golden heart next to your messages in the app, telling them that you did this. So you're going to see a lot more red in this section. I actually ended up collating the results just to see what actually happened here. What you'll notice is that I was set up.
In any case, based on these freemium features alone, Tinder became the highest grossing app in 99 countries only 3 years after it was invented, and the highest grossing app worldwide 2 years after that. So, you might be wondering, was Tinder's founder Sean Rad a huge fuck? And did things turn out well for him? Yeah, of course.
In 2014, two of Sean's employees were dating, and when the male one publicly called the female one a whore, Sean pressured the female employee to quit. Rumors also said that Sean was sexually harassing his female employees. But because of his compensation package, IAC, who is now Match Group, couldn't fire him for another year. When they did, they replaced him with a guy who left an office party with a female executive who was way too drunk. That new CEO would be fired too, and that female executive would go on to found Bumble, an app that's basically Tinder, but better at attracting female users. 100 geeky guys. Match Group then rehires Sean, and Sean becomes increasingly delusional about the product that he's made. He thinks he's like Zuckerberg, like an actual tastemaker in the attention economy, and not just some grifter following a wave using every single trick in the book in an industry where every trick in the book is somehow still legal.
He keeps insisting on this figure, $13 billion, $13 billion, as the worth of Tinder, when earlier the same year, Instagram was valued at $19 billion. But he thought he could beat it. At this point, the executives on Match Group were sick of Sean and decided to buy the company outright.
They'd go around to all the banks who actually make these valuations, and they would downplay the app until it was worth only $3 billion. Sean gets $360 million of that. He's still pissed about it, and he goes on to sue Match Group. Tinder, on the other hand, would try to hire CEOs that they hope could actually rehabilitate Tinder's image from a hookup app run by a bunch of misogynistic dickheads. They'd introduce compatibility matchmaking, which sucks for reasons we're going to talk about later, and more versions of Tinder Premium.
Tinder has quadrupled its revenue since the release of Tinder Gold and is only rivaled in terms of downloads by Bumble, which, as we said earlier, is basically the same app. Tinder recreated the dating scene in its own image. It made anything but freemium sound crazy and desperate, ingratiated itself among the younger generation, and forced the old guard like Match.com to adopt swiping features.
It seemed like Tinder had conquered the world, would likely continue to rule it, unless, I don't know, some new app with a hot CEO completely revolutionized the revenue model and thus the incentive structures that shaped user experience in a way that felt naturalistic and human again, and became the fastest growing dating app in the year of our Lord 2024.
In the future, the best dating site will be the one that matches people while making them think they did it all on their own. Justin McLeod was fresh out of business school when he took a job at McKinsey and their $12,000 starting bonus. He was also heartbroken at the time and recovering from a handful of addictions.
One of which, fortunately, wasn't gambling, because he spent his whole McKinsey starting bonus hiring an Argentinian development team to code this Facebook-linked dating app that he would call Hinge.
It was pretty much Tinder, but you could only connect with friends of your friends. The difference, Justin hoped, would be that you treated people like you would at a house party or a wedding or a dinner, and not like you would if you were drunk at a bar.
It launched and it did fine. McKinsey asked for their money back, and Tinder pulled away with the competition. Hinge only had a few 100,000 users, which was much less at this time than it was in the 90s, and it wasn't growing.
It had a different vibe from Tinder, but not much else.
And it was just like a real moment of reflection for me on a couple fronts. One is that growth for us was starting to stall. We'd had some success, but other apps that were very similar to us were outpacing us in terms of growth. They were just even more simple and cleaner and more fun than ours. And the other thing was just it wasn't the company that I wanted to build. The reputation of being this kind of like superficial hookup thing was just like so antithetical to what I originally tried to build, which was for someone who's searching for really deep and intimate connection to be able to like find your person.
in 2015, Hinge once again set about rebooting its app, laying off about half of the company in the process.
We went on a retreat where we talked about how we wanted to stop focusing on the competition and instead really build a product that was about getting people on great dates. That was our North Star metric.
It was here that Justin decided to make the anti-Tinder. The swipe was abolished, and with it, Sean Rad's double opt-in.
Instead, a user had to make themselves vulnerable by liking a feature of someone's profile, attaching a message to it, and then it would be on that person to decide whether or not they reciprocate and pursue a match with the other user.
Hinge profiles were more personalized than Tinder profiles, and the prompts were made intentionally dorky. If you wanted it on Hinge, you had to commit to being vulnerable. Justin said, "It's better for the algorithm to have a collection of people who are equally willing to put the effort in. We want to create a product that got people on great dates."
We didn't get distracted with very short-term thinking about engagement and retention and time in app and number of matches and all these other things that you could very easily get distracted by, and really kept our eye on, are we getting people out on dates that they're enjoying or not?
Match Group noticed Hinge's new solid foundation, and they agreed to make an initial investment before buying the company outright in 2018. Wait a second. So now one company owns both Tinder and the app that's sworn to do everything the exact opposite way? The app that purposefully limits the number of matches you see in order to promote deeper connections with each one? The app that eliminates addictive features that contribute to tech addiction? The app that uses exhaustive data to create solid matches that will encourage people to delete the app? Because to me, it seems like Justin and his company actually give a fuck about being a good dating app. So then why, when the ambitious and money-driven founders of Match and Tinder faced the board, they were fired, then this anti-growth, consumer protective CEO of Hinge faces the board and becomes the Match Group's golden boy?
I'm afraid the answer is going to make you dislike Justin. I almost don't want to tell you guys this. Just remember, he was in Modern Love with the hot girl from Being John Malkovich. All right, let's get into it. Hinge still offers subscriptions, which are bad, but they're less fundamental to the app than they are to Tinder. The real bad thing about Hinge is its algorithm. It's really, really good. Maybe too good?
So in order to get an idea of the kinds of people you'll be compatible with, Hinge gets a lot of information. There's the kind that's somewhat invasive, but you hand over in your profile without thinking twice about it, like your drug taking habits, your location, and your deal breakers and partner, including your religion, ethnicity. Then there's the information you don't really consider, like the recorded history of every message you've ever sent. And then there's information called inferred data, which includes the things you've unconsciously revealed about yourself just by existing, like your intelligence and your physical attractiveness and your personality type.
It's a lot of data to train machine learning models on, and they train extensively. See, out in the world, there exists a voodoo doll of you. Inside of Facebook servers, inside of Google servers, there's a little voodoo doll, and it is a model of you. It starts by not looking much like you. It's sort of a generic model of a human. But then they're collecting your click traits, i.e., everything you click on, and your toenail clippings and your hair droppings, everything you search for, every little detail of your life online. They're reassembling all that metadata you don't really think is meaningful, so that doll looks more and more like you. Then, when you show up on, for example, YouTube, they're waking up that doll, and they're testing out hundreds and thousands of videos against the doll, seeing what makes its arm twitch and move, so they know it's effective, and then they serve that to you. By the way, they have a doll like that for 1 in 4 human beings on Earth. At the moment, these voodoo dolls are sometimes crude and sometimes startling specifically, but the systems are getting more sophisticated every year. It's getting to be so good that whenever I give a presentation, I'll ask the audience how many think Facebook is listening to their conversations, because there's some ad that's been served that's just too accurate. It's about something they never mentioned before other than to a friend the other day. Now, it's generally 1/2 to 2/3 of the audience that raises their hands. The truth is creepier. It's not that they are listening and then they can do targeted ad serving. It's that their model of you is so accurate that it's making predictions about you that you think are magic. Also, as a side note, advertisers will often use device data to see whose devices you're often around and start to serve you targeted ads meant for them, so that you and them having a conversation about that product then encourages them to buy it.
But okay. Now, when you talk about data privacy online, there's going to be a lot of overly cautious losers in your ear. Like the Mozilla Corporation, for instance, runs this blog where they give most of these dating companies failing grades just because their password requirements aren't strict enough. And then a majority of their users are going to log on and say that this is very creepy. But then again, like, who can blame them? The Firefox guy is the guy who invented infinite scrolling, and he talks about it like he's Oppenheimer.
Accolades is too strong. I'm the hapless human being that invented infinite scroll. So this was back in 2006.
Yeah.
So that new technology had come out that you could reload, you could get new content in without having to reload the whole page. And I was sitting there thinking about blog posts and I was thinking about search, and I was like, well, every time I, as a designer, ask you, the user, to make a choice you don't care about or click something you don't need to, I've failed. So obviously, if I get near the bottom of the page, I should just load some more search results or load the next blog post. And I'm like, this is just a better interface. And I was blind to the incentives, and this is before social media really had started going. I was blind to how it was going to get picked up and used not for people, but against people.
Okay, so why does Hinge stand out in all this? Why didn't Tinder, which is owned by the same parent company with the same data policies, get this lecture? Well, because Hinge gathers the most comprehensive data of all time on the most useful subject of all time. Oppenheimer himself, Ozzy Raskin, talks in Stolen Focus about style transfer.
If you use it, you can show a computer lots of paintings by Van Gogh, and then you point to it at a new scene, and it can recreate it in the style of Van Gogh. Asa told me how style transfer could quite soon be used against you or me. Google today can read all of your Gmail, come up with a model that can mimic your style, and then sell that to an advertiser. You as the user don't even know what's going on, but you will start to receive emails that are unusually welcoming and persuasive because they sound just like you. Asa explained. Even worse, they could look at all the emails you responded to quickly and positively and learn that style. So they learn the style that is uniquely persuasive to you. There's nothing illegal about that. There are no laws to protect you against that. Is it breaking your privacy? They're not selling your data. They're just selling an asymmetric knowledge about how you work, even more than you know about yourself, to the highest bidder. So when Hinge learns your type, learns when in conversations you start to schedule a date, what excites you and what doesn't, they're gaining data that advertisers would cut off their own tongues for. It's not hard to imagine what they'll do with this once AI becomes more capable. They'll amalgam all the most attractive, most personally persuasive people you've ever encountered into a singular being who can sell you anything. They're building,
Hinge is in the business of,
well, making digital skinwalkers.
and they're good, and they're persistent, and they're going to morph into the person dearest to you and cry out for help in their voice. And when in your moment of weakness you betray an ounce of belief, they will separate your rib bones and climb inside. You don't stand a chance. And like a real skinwalker strolling beside your car at 60 miles an hour, your digital skinwalker follows you everywhere. Other companies receive data from Hinge, even though Match Group deliberately obfuscates their data policies and they claim that they don't sell data. They absolutely share it. They'll give it to Facebook so Facebook can remove you from the list of people that they target about Hinge. But Facebook is definitely going to use that data. Facebook, whom none of us trust, is shoring up your voodoo doll, and they're selling your data. And almost every website you visit has a cookie on it that Facebook uses to track you. And anywhere you go, that skinwalker can pop out and whisper to you the name of your first pet, or the street that you grew up on, or your mother's maiden name.
All of this, Justin's not going to tell you. It's not that he's particularly into Wendigos. He doesn't necessarily want your insides in a jellied egg sack. We personally believe that he cares about tech addiction and making sure love can continue to exist. He's just willing to accept the risks.
We're all just a bunch of egg boys, and he's trying to make an omelet. I just hope that Skinwalker's a good chef.
Those who make W-Riz impossible will make Skibbity inevitable.
In real life, in a place where people meet people, there's a sense of mystery. You make eye contact with someone, then it's a guessing game. Do they want something from me? They smile and nod. Are they into me? And it probably is all in the eyes. My mom has a story about the night when she met my dad. She was with a friend in Billy Bob's. It's a country bar in Fort Worth. Her friend told her that if she made eye contact with any man for at least 3 seconds, they would come over and buy her a drink. And what do you know? The way that someone looks at you grounds the whole interaction in a new context. It might be a welcoming look, or a mocking one, or it's self-indulgent and smug, like they're even congratulating themselves for bucking up the courage to look at you. The look might even just be flat out dangerous feeling.
That new context can be a scary place. You can misread the other person's intentions. You can start to feel claustrophobic. Too intimate too fast. You'll perform your best and maybe you'll buckle. You won't have any time to think. You'll say an awkward line and fumble it, or you'll wait too long for the perfect line and fumble it, or you'll just duck your eyes and wish this person were holding your head underwater and drowning this nobody fuck up wasting her time.
It's anxiety inducing. I've got too much debt on my credit card and too many microplastics rattling in my blood to put up with it. An app, on the other hand, presents me with an unmistakable context. Here is a person who likes you. Say hi. By sterilizing what would otherwise be a scary situation, the app becomes this benevolent adult in the room, pushing two shy kids together and saying, go, play.
As a consequence, the app endears itself to the user as their caretaker, and the user trusts the app more than the people they meet on it.
So for a winter when I was 20, I lived alone in Rapid City, South Dakota, population fucking balls. One time, Tinder brought me to a party in the log cabins south of Mount Rushmore. I was the girl's first Tinder date. She was just beginning her education of the world. She was asking it what it contained and what it could bring her. I got along with her friends. I gave her the right compliments and I asked her the right questions and I spaced them all far enough apart that it didn't feel like an interview. As we were nodding off for bed, she said to me, I'm so glad I downloaded this app. The app was closer to her than I was. The experience was more real to her than I was. Now, I could have taken comfort in acting as an emissary between her and this world that was opening its petals to her, but I didn't. I was insulted. The next day, I was called away for a funeral, and by the time I returned, each of our attentions had drifted off to someplace new, as they do in any life worth living. And this story is about how she trusted the app more than me. But I also want to point out how, in this story about a girl that I supposedly miss, every detail is about me. What do I even remember about this blonde from Southwest South Dakota? Well, she worked at Plato's Closet. Her male best friend wore Volcom from head to toe, and he was clearly in love with her. I didn't really see her as a person either. For me and her both, the experience was realer than the person we shared it with. Maybe we're all innately selfish, and this tends to happen with people we don't really care about all too much, and people we feel powerful around because we already know that they think we're attractive. But I'd argue that it's mostly because of how pacified and toothless this stranger was sold to me as.
When we're no longer afraid of strangers, we can be sold on them as products.
Because I won't be scared when I roll on a digital slot machine and they pop out as my reward. When a product as a reward pops out of a slot machine, it's going to take me a while to see that product as a human being.
For the first while that we're talking to our matches online, I don't think any of us see them as human beings. We know we want to, but our brains are efficient.
We're piecing through a lot of stuff and a lot of options, and we weren't meant to see this many people in our entire lives, let alone an hour. So we reduced them down to interpretable categories based on established monikers like Film Bro or Crystal's Girl.
We talk to enough people that we systematize our conversations to move things forward. It often looks like this.
One party offers an attention grabber, a fun fact, an ironic pickup line, something that differentiates them.
Then y'all ask each other a bunch of getting to know you type questions. You confirm that the other person isn't a weirdo, a creep, or a serial killer.
After a sizable amount of that, only then is it okay to flirt or to schedule a meetup. And sometimes scheduling the meetup will happen before any flirting at all, because you both already know what you're doing on the app. So nothing really needs to be said.
Funny enough, this systematized way of talking is just a deconstructed form of real life flirting. It works because it hits all of the person's needs. In real life, all the steps, the attention grabbing, the assurance of safety, and the flirting happen at the same time.
You say, "So tell me what you do," with a big smile and fuck me eyes. And because a million people aren't speaking to the same person at once, no attention grabber is really needed besides your name and your physical presence in front of them.
But even if it's based on something real, it's one step removed. It's simulacra. We're talking in this formulaic way to a sanitized stand-in for a human need. We're using an equation to gain ground with someone we don't even believe is a person.
I had Tinder when I was 18. I didn't actually use it to meet up with anyone because I was 20. Because before I figured out this min-max meta gameplay loop, I was experimenting with a slew of strategies, and I had a seemingly infinite number of profiles to guess and to check with. And when I wasn't talking in incomprehensibly anxious sentence fragments, I was slipping into these half-remembered pickup artist strategies. Like quick invitations to my bed, half self-aware talk about how shallow everyone on this app was, and shy attempts at negging. My heart wasn't in it. I was a kid trying to share a moment with someone. It was a learned behavior.
A lot of guys use these apps and pick up similar ideas, similar behaviors, and act in similar ways. They want to do what works, and the ideas in their heads aren't really theirs.
It's a performance.
Performing while dating is, of course, not a new thing. There's a sociological term called impression management from Irving Goffman. It's used to describe the ways we change our behavior to appear acceptable to the people around us. Our ideas of what is acceptable changes depending on the context. So like actors on a stage, we have a unique performance for our friends, for our coworkers, and for our romantic partners. Generally, the performance we do for romantic partners has an implied intimacy. It's just us and them.
But another sociologist, George Simmel, calls this a dyadic relationship. See, a group can either be a dyad or a triad. It can be a dyad if it's composed of only two people. If it's a dyad, the relationship is immediate and concrete. The members can share inside jokes, influence each other in turn. Both of them have to cooperate to keep the relationship from becoming asymmetrical. There's a host of things that make this a more intimate relationship. If you add a third, right, you can never get this back. Simmel actually characterizes every group with more than two members as a triad because a group of three in his mind has infinitely more in common with a group of 3,000 than with a group of two. Good interaction among three or more people happens when all of them join with the social soul and sail on the common thought of the party, as Ralph Waldo Emerson would say. But in doing so, they put their individual selves aside. Obviously, it's difficult to talk about this in grounded terms, but essentially, in a triad, there's camaraderie and good times, but never intimacy.
See, on dating apps, you are never in a dyad. It's totally naive to assume you've ever been talking to just one person or not at risk of other people seeing what you say. Any internet savvy young person brings with them an intense self-consciousness anywhere they have their name and face on their profile. all over social media. They see group chats ripping apart dating profiles, threads of people tearing into awkward guys who can't flirt right. And none of this is born of malice, really. Humans evolved to be gossips because gossip was important for sharing information about which individuals were trustworthy. Even though it's no more likely for a romantic partner to lie about themselves online than it is in person, the myth of the dating app scammer is so prevalent that almost all dating app users exist in a state of hypervigilance. After all, sometimes the internet catches someone being duplicitous and it ends up validating everyone's fears.
Tribal and village communities used to believe that the relationships of lovers and spouses were actually a communal concern because difficulties there had the potential to impact everyone around them. But this panoptic, watchful eye that dating users feel online lacks the concern for their well being. Online scrutiny is only punitive, and the threat of it makes you defensive. Oftentimes, when you're actually competing with your match to avoid losing.
And by lose, I mean anything that could expose you to scrutiny or any of the various things that could be considered as your match getting the upper hand on you. This includes clumsy flirting, catching feelings, getting offended or hot headed. The only solution is to forget your emotions. Perfect indifference, totally masculine, regardless of your gender.
If you float above the relationship and you hold on to it lightly, if you say far fewer words than the other person does when they express their feelings, you will have avoided losing. Hell, if you really rattle them into saying something stupid, you could even win. And winning in this context isn't even Pyrrhic. It's actually probably the best case scenario.
Previously, you were performing for people you didn't believe were real. For a chance to get closer to a human need you were systematically alienated from.
But now you have a funny story. I mean, since the dawn of time, dunking on someone way too eager to get to know you has been funny. So now you have a way to amuse your friends, as well as an entry point into a larger cultural dialogue. It's honestly probably an absolute win. Which brings us to the second catastrophic allure of dating apps. Everyone else is using them, and they have fun stories. Love is an ancient concept, but our attitudes towards it aren't. We forget that when Romeo and Juliet was written, it was a cautionary tale, not a goalpost for our relationships.
From about the dawn of time until 1952, families found matches for the younger generation based on compatibility. The marriages may have been arranged, or a line of suitors picked out, or the nice girl from church brought around to Sunday brunch.
And this system was long theorized to be optimal for mate selection, and the social closure did have benefits in terms of relationship quality and duration. At the same time, this system enabled a deal of marital violence and restricted a lot of personal freedom.
Then, in the late 20th century, young adults started marrying later and depending on each other more. So the advice of friends became valued more than the oversight of parents.
A person's friends could even bridge them into social worlds entirely alien what they experienced growing up. So you start to get these disparate people connecting through their friends. And since they trusted their friends' judgment, they trusted their dates enough to pursue dyadic, humanized connection with them. On top of that, friends tended to put less emphasis on social stability and more on love, which idea had been in vogue for about 100 years and was winning slow victories against the wishes of people's parents. Then, with all the history we covered earlier, people moved online.
We put people in a situation where they had more options than ever before and less time to think about each one.
And at the same time, we got rid of the advice of our friends and the well-wishing guidance of our parents.
People cannot think correctly when they have too many options. They need some guidance. So, dating apps naturally invented algorithms to mix results.
Apps quickly move away from primitive models like Tinder's ELO system, and they adopted more features of what we've been calling and will continue to call compatibility matchmaking. You know, the same thing that parents were trying to do originally. So most apps ask users to choose a handful of interests and try to match you with people who share those interests.
This is all well and good until you've swiped no on 2 dozen people because none of them like hiking. It makes sense that we would filter like that because we have to create arbitrary constraints when faced with so many options. But is not liking hiking really a deal breaker? I'd actually argue it's kind of a good thing.
See, we've incentivized the best friendification of our significant others, but it's nice to have things that you don't do with your partners and you do with your friends. In our opinion, we want too badly for our partners to function like friends because we don't know what we're looking for in our partners the same way that we know what we're looking for in our friends. What ends up happening is that we choose one person with whom we do everything. We wrap up our hobbies and our needs for physical touch and emotional security in one person, and we demolish our social circles. We shrink our world to the point where we can't possibly break up with the person, or our entire reality will go into free fall. We'll risk spending every single day perfect blank solitude when they can no longer meet our every need. Wouldn't it be nice to go on a hike with your hiking friends instead of boyfriend? I envy the old New Yorker couples who exist amicably for a couple of hours at a time, and they take leave from their spouse for a trip with their wino friends or a long jog around the Hudson with their running pals.
It'll be really nice when apps to help you find friends exist. Sure, Yubo exists now, but everyone know that's an app for teenagers to have e-sex. Definitely not for adults to make friends. The idea of someone making real-life friends online strikes me the same way that someone might think about online dating back in the 1990s. Frankly, I think that person's probably a loser. I have no reason to think that, I just kind of do. But I know that I won't think that for long. There's a lot of reasons a friend making app would work. One, I don't know if you've heard, but we're in a friend recession. I was scrounging around on the couch for a loose friend, couldn't find any. The average adult man only has 1 to 2 close friends, and with the collapse of the American third space, he has few places to find more. And number two, sex has always been a valuable tool in popularizing novel technologies before they become more generalized in use. In her article on sex robots, Dr. Stephanie Galazzi writes, Pietro Aretino's pornographic postures and Francois Rabelais' obscene gargantua and pentagrel boosted the early printing press. The vibrator, patented in the early 1880s, was one of the first 5 appliances to be electrified, in this case in order to relieve the burden from male doctors who had been manually curing hysteria in their female patients.
Which is a crazy true fact that we don't think about enough.
Another example, the VCR benefited from an early surge in X-rated pre-recorded tapes. The early camcorder industry was similarly bolstered by the market for visual sex. Photography, paperback books, modern video conferencing, and even fucking answering machines received early support from sex media before they ended up going more mainstream. And perhaps its ultimate coup, pornography also helped establish the market for the internet.
Hookup apps are probably going to lead the way for compatibility algorithm technology, but later subside to being a niche use case because, well, compatibility algorithms are a pretty bad way of finding a partner. They rely on people knowing what they want in their romantic others in the same way that they know what they want in a friend. The dating app algorithms do try to fix this issue inherent in compatibility matchmaking by putting more emphasis on what a user does than on what a user says.
They know that people aren't sure what they actually want, so a user may lie in their preferences, either purposefully or accidentally. So, apps may use data from your social media profiles to fact check. They can actually identify whether what you said in your preferences was a lie. So if you're retweeting a lot of shirtless photos of Ross Lynch, that's going to matter. They can also use machine learning to tweak recommendations based on your behavior.
OkCupid gives this example where a user says that they like men of a certain height, but they routinely message people who are shorter. So the app ends up learning that height isn't as much of a deal breaker as the user said it was, and they start silently shifting their recommendations. Hinge uses similar machine learning along with a Nobel Prize winning algorithm called the Gale-Shapley algorithm. It was created in 1962 by two economists who wanted to prove that any pool of people could be sifted into stable marriages. But one, Hinge mostly just looks for patterns in who its users have liked and rejected, then compares those patterns to the patterns of other users. And two, this is exactly the same thing that people's families were doing for them before love became a socially acceptable reason to marry. And when you see it this way, that algorithms were invented to do what humans as social animals basically evolved to do, the conclusion isn't exactly surprising. No matter how complicated they are, none of these algorithms are particularly successful in predicting who will love whom.
A sociologist named Kevin Lewis conducted a study on online dating. He wrote, "We suggest that online dating frequently fails to meet user expectations because people, unlike many commodities available for purchase online, are experience goods. Daters wish to screen potential romantic partners by experiential attributes, such as sense of humor or rapport, but online dating websites force them to screen by searchable attributes, such as income or religion."
And for this reason, another researcher who did extensive work with dating apps, Dr. Eli Finkel, thinks that simpler algorithms that don't overpromise may actually be superior. There are inherent limits to how well the success of a relationship between two individuals can be predicted in advance of their awareness of each other, he says. The best established predictors of how a romantic relationship will develop can be known only after a relationship begins, such as the way they respond to unpredictable and uncontrollable events that have not yet happened. It's cute, and yeah, I agree. I've gotten really into people that I met on dating apps with good algorithms, but I always overestimated my interest in them. You know, the whole like, do I want to be them? Do I want to be with them? Do I want to be friends with them? Do I have a gender problem? I only ever found love on Tinder with people I never intended to fall in love with. Yes, Tinder is superficial, Dr. Finkel says. It doesn't let people browse profiles to find compatible partners, and it doesn't claim to possess an algorithm that can find your soulmate. But this approach is at least honest and avoids the errors committed by more traditional approaches to online dating. But obviously, a technology that replaces our traditional matchmaking avenues and then throws in the towel isn't very well designed. We need help. The human brain doesn't do well in situations with too many options, not a lot of time, and no reliable guidance. No app can or is really willing to solve for cognitive overload because it's caused by the same thing that draws people to online dating, all of the options.
We're swiping fast and we need a roadmap. Something has to influence our choices and steer us along. When we have nothing else, we reach inward and act from our default unthinking mode, the way our brain has been trained to interpret uncertain social contexts.
We act steered by thoughts that aren't our own, but that we've heard validated out in the world. So then attitudes that aren't our own come out in our actions, and then by repetition, determine our preferences. So let's talk about where we get our attitudes from. People in this decade are spending less time around their friends than ever. We're often alone. We rarely feel it. We rarely feel much at all because our devices are so good at numbing us. They're a crutch for many of us. And for those of us that they are, social media is our primary outlet into the world of others.
Leering in on social media discourse, listening to these strangers talk constantly, gives us data on what is culturally acceptable, what is cool, and what we should aspire to.
It wasn't a coincidence, and hear me on this, it wasn't a coincidence that everyone fell in love with goth girls at the same time. When you read on social media isn't an honest reflection of what people are actually into. The experience of posting on social media feels much different than reading on social media. We forget this. We create and we interpret with very different mindsets. When you post, you're shooting from the hip, you're throwing a thought out untethered to any context. The written word, however, has a permanence and a weight to it that strike you differently when you read it.
You can see a tweet that says, I don't care what anyone says. No one wants to talk to you when you're depressed. They won't admit it, but they really do find you annoying. It was probably written by someone who was depressed and going through it, but when you're scrolling Twitter, you don't treat each poster as individuals with their own rich context. You parse through every tweet as if it were speaking to you from a collective social consciousness.
So now, because of this tweet you've just encountered, you have this brain worm validating that you're a burden to your friends when you're sad.
It's kind of fucked up.
Then, on top of that, social media algorithms are designed to feed us lowest common denominator commentary, stuff that everyone agrees with a little bit. Twitter and Instagram serve content that engages people enough to make them stay on the app and interact. So, to the algorithm, the greatest content and what they push the most are going to be sentiments that everyone likes a little bit. But by amplifying these sentiments, social media algorithms cause them to gain more importance, and the dialogue starts to revolve and center around commonplace, banal, kind of true sentiments. One that stands out to us in this context is based on the fact that fewer people know how to talk about love than know how to talk about adventure. So all over social media, you're going to see stories about sex and hooking up in wild places. And it makes you think that everyone is using the apps this way, that this is their intended use case, when in reality, hookup culture is a hyper visible specter. This statistic might surprise you as much as it surprised us. Only 22% of Tinder users use it for hookups. Isn't that crazy? Aren't these hookup apps? As it turns out, no. A large percentage of the user base has no interest in casual sex. And then that neoliberal perversion of second wave feminism, the girl who sleeps with whoever, whenever, way more often than she would like, is less prescient than its bloated mascot leads us to believe. Most of the people who do fantasize about casual sex aren't willing to actually do it. It's intimidating. You have to spend time getting familiar with how people work in general. And you have to put your self esteem teetering on the edge, always wondering if you can replicate your success. Can you get another date? Can you make this person crazy about you? Can you make this person respect you for more than your body? Can you do it again? Can you do it again? Oftentimes, the people who date casually irrevocably fuck up their ability to be intimate. No one wants to hear cautionary tales of individuals who are suffering from success. But the former alpha males who can no longer get it up for the women that they love, and the femme people who stumble into a pattern of violent, abusive lovers have valid stories. We have other unconscious biases to contend with too, beyond social media. There's a website out there that demonstrates a phenomenon called collaborative filtering. Essentially, algorithms, all of the dating app algorithms, draw patterns between users with similar swiping styles. So if an earlier user swipes no on one profile and then they swipe no on a Jewish person's profile for whatever reason, any user who swipes no on that first profile is much less likely to see the Jewish person's profile, essentially soft hiding that Jewish person's profile. Since we live in a post-colonial world with Eurocentric beauty standards, black and brown accounts are routinely deprioritized in the stack. Even if we ourselves are conscious about our swiping choices, the algorithm will still lump us in with the people who thought less than we did and swiped with their unconscious biases. So the profiles will be buried for us too, regardless. And these are biases for us to consciously contend with because, yes, we've sublimated the racial and sexist ideology of a culturally reactionary post 9/11 nation When we have time to think about these ideas, we regard them as personally abhorrent, and the behaviors that they create as socially repulsive. But when we have time to think, we stop swiping. And when we stop swiping, we stop providing accurate data on who we are at our most basal level. So we aren't given time to think. And our brains will try to conserve their energy in a stressful landscape with too many good options. And thus, we will revert to the social logic we were taught in childhood. And thereby, we will turn into a racist, sexist, lizard brain little dick. What this means, besides personal work for us as individuals, is that the subset of incels called ethnocels, who believe that they're being thwarted because they aren't white, are, in this context, completely correct. In fact, because these apps are designed to keep us from viewing the people on our screens as human beings, and because the attention economy is explicitly designed to biohack us into obeying our every impulse and unconscious bias, then online dating actually creates an ecosystem where incels in general are correct. Like, the gender disparity does create a competitive hunter-prey environment where masculine people pursue and divvy up a scarce supply of female people. More conventionally attractive men, or chads, do get more attention on apps where profiles are based around photos. For a lot of people, it's hard not to take the black pill. The primary dating marketplace of their time is the one place in which a lot of what the black pill says is true. To be fully clear, crystal clear, incels are not right about women and their coldness, their vapidity, and biological single-mindedness. But in the context of dating apps, the incel theology is correct about the way in which women at large are systematically withheld from the meek and distributed to the world's Alexander Skarsgårds. When a person does take the black pill, they accept all the nasty stuff that we conflate it with. They begin to feel not only indifferent about their sexual partners, but to hate them for the power that they hold, for their cruel withholding of sex and affection, for their hatred of men, for their sly, unkind whispers on social media. Pornography, another powerful aspect of the attention economy, exerts a larger influence on their unconscious biases. Frequently, this leads to more violent sex. This will be hard to hear if you don't already know it, but a third of all women who use dating apps report having been sexually assaulted. Half of those report being raped. Women, trans people, and feminine men on these apps know to fear men. Gossiping, withholding, makes sense. It would be crazy to try to do this otherwise. Even I'm scared when I meet up with guys on dating. And if you're a man, this sucks to hear. Not only because you have empathy and understand on at least a basic level how dehumanizing, humiliating, and lonely sexual violence feels, but because you likely have a good heart. You don't want to be lumped in with people who would do anything like that, even if those people are only obeying their sublimated proclivity to violence situation where they feel trapped. Men have the capacity to be gentle, endlessly caring, infinitely gentle. Even the men not given to violent tendencies can feel so guilty and creepy in contexts where they have to chase and to cloy that they start to lean into toxic male archetypes like we discussed earlier, either because the archetypes feel safe or because the archetypes can act as a persona that that person can inhabit while they participate in a system where they feel gross. Other people might lean out of masculinity altogether. Me, I'm genderqueer, right? Mostly because I identify with a lot of the female experience. But I won't deny that a lot of the things I saw men do when I was younger made me ashamed. I couldn't bear the thought that anyone would look at me and think that I had the capacity to do the same thing. So I became endlessly skeptical of other men. I couldn't identify a trace of kindness in any of them. And I started to look even at my closest friends only for what they could do or what they might do. It was a tremendously unkind way to look at things, and I filtered everything they said or did this way until they were utterly bestial to me. It's unfair. It only made me feel lonely. So, what do? We download Hinge, but with some nuance. Download Hinge and send voice messages. We have to date online because that's where everyone is now. And yeah, Hinge is going to fuck you up in the long term, but you're fucked anyway. Big corporations have your data. Your voodoo doll is getting fucking anti-aliased face port. It's getting really realistic. And digital skinwalkers are going to track your scent. Whatever. Hinge's algorithm isn't helpful in finding love, but the app is designed to get you off your phone. We have a genuine moral imperative to limit our tech addiction and to do it soon.
Because the technology is just going to get better and better, and it's going to get easier and easier and more convenient and more pleasurable to sit alone with images on a screen given to us by people who do not love us but want our money. And that's fine in low doses. But if it's the basic main staple of your diet, you're going to die.
Well, come on.
In a very meaningful way, you're going to die.
Secondly, use the voice chat feature.
So yeah, you're gay.
A few things are notable about chatting over voice. Well, it can't be read passively. The other person has to stop and listen. It interrupts the core gameplay loop for them. They can only process it as fast as you speak. You get to reclaim all of the tone signifiers that voice adds, making it more like real life. And then because you escape the inhuman split stage dialogue that happens over text, which contributes to that gross feeling that dating apps give you. Plus, it makes you stand out. It indicates confidence.
There is something to not giving a fuck while you're writing shit, because women are like, man, he doesn't give a fuck if this goes well or not. I guess I gotta go out with him.
Hinge has their own figure on this. They say you get like 40% more dates when you send voice memos. What it does for the relationship itself, well, it makes you real to one another. The sad fucks who write in Hollywood will say that there's a problem with being too real. Fuck that. Cutting through artifice, this weird saran wrap all around our lives, is always welcome. Romance is an inexhaustible resource, able to be expended whenever, welcome even casually. When I was in college, I wrote an op-ed piece about an Instagram page where people could post about their missed encounters around campus. It ends like this. We don't have to understand the seduction game as a game at all high stakes and one-liners and emotional chicanery. It can be simpler than that. Nothing more than you and them, two bodies controlled by the same endlessly bandying inner voice, at times suppressing it, and at other times giving in. Hey, smash that fucking like button.